An ancient map held a secret that broke every known rule of geography. In the quiet halls of the Arcane University, a young scholar named Elara found a hidden compartment inside a forgotten atlas. The fragment of parchment inside showed coastlines and mountains that did not match any chart of Tamriel. Her discovery was an impossibility, a geographical ghost. By choosing to investigate, Elara risked her entire future, trading academic safety for a dangerous truth that could rewrite history itself. By the end of this journey, you will understand how the very shape of a world can be a lie, and the courage required to redraw it. We will uncover why entire lands were erased from memory and who benefits from a forgotten past. Where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time where you are? What does it mean for a place to simply vanish from the world? The ink on the parchment seemed to shift under the steady glow of her mage light. Elara spent nights tracing every faded line, her focus narrowing until she found it. Near the jagged peaks of the Geral Mountains, a tiny, intricate pattern was etched into the margin. It was a celestial alignment, a specific arrangement of stars and planets, but it matched no chart in the university's great observatory. This was a sky that had never been seen, or one that had been deliberately forgotten. Her heart raced with the implications, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was not a simple cartographic error. It was a message. Her excited murmurs did not go unnoticed. A senior mage named Valerius, a man known for his rigid adherence to doctrine, overheard her discussions with a fellow apprentice. He demanded to see the fragment, his expression growing increasingly stern as he examined it. He declared it a probable forgery, a dangerous distraction, and confiscated it for official review. The door to the archive slammed shut, leaving Elara with nothing but her notes and a crushing sense of loss. The choice before her was stark. She could accept the authorities' verdict, return to her sanctioned studies, and let the mystery fade. Or she could defy the very institution that had been her home. The truth, she realized, was worth more than her place within those walls. Late that night, with a whispered apology to the silence, she picked the lock on Valerius's study and reclaimed her fragment. The act was quiet, but its echo was deafening. She was no longer just a curious scholar. She was a thief in the eyes of the university, a rogue element. A subtle tension settled over the corridors afterward. She noticed the way certain mages would stop talking when she approached, and the feeling of being watched became a constant, cold companion. With the fragment safely hidden against her skin, Elara knew the university held no more answers, only threats. Her path now led beyond the spires and into the sprawling, ancient heart of the imperial city, to public archives where forgotten histories might slumber untouched by academic decree. The imperial archives were a labyrinth of dust and whispers. Elara adopted the guise of a junior scribe, her movements careful and her questions innocuous as she requested folios of restricted cartographic records. For days, she sat at a worn wooden desk, the stolen fragment concealed in a codex, cross-referencing its impossible geography with crumbling scrolls. The official histories yielded nothing, but in the marginalia of a crumbling merchant's log, she found a fleeting reference. It spoke of the crystal compass, a device used by the earliest cartographers not to chart land, but to navigate the shifting threads of reality itself. The concept was staggering. It suggested the map was not wrong. The world was. Her focused research did not go unseen. A silent, hooded archivist, a man who seemed more a part of the shelves than a person, noted her persistent inquiries. As she left one evening, his hand brushed against hers, and a small, tightly folded square of vellum was pressed into her palm. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she unfolded it in a secluded alcove. The message was stark, written in a sharp, elegant script. They know you have it. Cease your inquiries, or you will be ceased. The Weeping Willow, Elven Gardens, midnight. Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and sharp. Was this a genuine warning from a sympathetic soul, or an elegant trap laid by Valerius or another, unknown faction? Trust felt like a luxury she could not afford, yet ignoring the note felt even more dangerous. It was the only thread she had. With a resolve that felt frighteningly fragile, she made her choice. She would go to the meeting. This single decision, made alone in the silent archive, pulled her from the realm of academic rebellion into the shadowy underworld of Tamriel's true knowledge keepers. Here, secrets were not merely studied, they were guarded, traded, and killed for. Information was a currency more valuable than gold, and she had just announced herself as a new player in a very old, very dangerous game. The city streets at night were a different world, a tapestry of gloom and distant sounds. Elara moved through the winding lanes of the Elven Gardens district, her cloak pulled tight, every shadow seeming to hold a watching eye. She approached the gnarled silhouette of the Weeping Willow, its branches like skeletal fingers in the moonlight, completely unaware that this meeting would tear aside the veil, revealing a faction that had operated in the world's blind spots for centuries. The figure beneath the willow tree did not move as she approached. He lowered his hood, revealing a face etched with the fine lines of age and endless quiet observation. His voice was a soft murmur, barely louder than the rustling leaves. "I am a keeper of the Cyphers Guild," he said, a name that meant nothing to her, yet everything. He explained they were a scattered fellowship, scribes and surveyors who worked in the shadows to preserve the true maps, the ones that had been altered or purged from official record. "Your discovery has made you a beacon," he warned. "The university's disapproval is merely an inconvenience. The true danger comes from the erasers." A cold dread settled deep within Elara. The erasers, he explained, were not simple thieves. They were a fanatical order dedicated to a single purpose: the systematic destruction of any cartographic evidence that contradicted the established, sanctioned shape of Tamriel. They did not debate history, they burned it. They believed that a stable, unchanging world was the only thing preventing a return to a chaotic, mythic era, and they would kill to maintain that illusion. "Your fragment is a key to a lock they sealed millennia ago. They will not stop until it and you are ash." Could she trust this man, this self-proclaimed guardian of lost geographies? His words wove a conspiracy of continental scale, a secret war fought with ink and blood over the world's very identity. To believe him was to accept that her entire education, the foundation of all she knew, was a carefully constructed lie. Yet his knowledge of the fragment, of the celestial alignment, of Valerius' confiscation, was too precise to be a guess. He knew things only someone inside the walls of power could know. Her choice was a leap of faith into darkness. With a slow, deliberate nod, she agreed to a temporary alliance. In exchange for the guild's protection and access to their hidden troves of knowledge, she would grant them the fragment for study. It was a desperate bargain, trading her only physical proof for a chance at survival and deeper understanding. The moment she placed the parchment into his gloved hand, the nature of her journey shifted irrevocably. She was no longer just a fugitive from the university. By aligning with the Cyphers Guild, she had formally declared herself an enemy of the Erasers. She had stepped onto a hidden battlefield, and the stakes were the memory of the world itself. The archivist's eyes held a glimmer of respect and pity. He pressed a new slip of vellum into her hand. "There is a woman in Anvil, a port captain named Kyarth," he whispered. "She asks questions about tides that do not match the charts and islands that appear on no modern map. Find her. She holds another piece of this puzzle." With that, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Elara alone under the willow. The name Kyarth and the salt-scented promise of Anvil, now the only coordinates on her new, dangerous map. The journey to Anvil was a tense, salt-sprayed blur. Elara secured passage on a merchant cog named the Sea Serpent, trading a small, enchanted trinket from her university days for berth and board. In the cramped darkness of her cabin, she practiced the defensive wards she had only ever read about, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns in the air. The fragment remained a constant, humming secret against her skin, its presence a comfort and a curse. The open sea offered no sanctuary, only a vast, empty horizon that felt more like a target. The storm came without warning, a monstrous, boiling wall of cloud that swallowed the sunset. The winds tore at the sails with a fury that felt intelligent, malicious. Waves rose like black mountains, slamming into the hull with the force of a giant's fist. This was no natural squall. The air crackled with a hostile energy, a signature of magic meant to destroy, not to simply rage. As the ship was driven dangerously close to the jagged cliffs of Hammerfell, Elara knew she had to act. With the crew fighting for their lives, she focused her will, channeling her magicka into a desperate, untested spell. Her hands glowed with a pale blue light as she pushed against the wall of water, threatening to capsize them. A simple manipulation spell meant for moving small streams, not calming a vengeful ocean. The strain was immense, a searing pain behind her eyes as the ship groaned and righted itself, pulled from the rocks by her sheer force of will. The wave receded, but her magicka was utterly spent, leaving her trembling and hollow on the rain-lashed deck. The storm dissipated as quickly as it had arrived, leaving an unnerving calm. The crew, who had moments before been shouting panicked orders, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and deep suspicion. She had saved them, but she had also marked herself. The magical backlash of the storm confirmed her deepest fear. The Erasers were not just historians with a destructive agenda. They commanded forces that could warp the weather itself, and they knew exactly where she was. Anvil's white-walled harbor was a welcome sight, but it offered no peace. Her display of power had made her a known quantity, a beacon for any watching eyes. She moved through the bustling docks with a new wariness, her senses screaming at every unfamiliar glance. The air smelled of salt, fish, and secrets. Following the Cyphers' directions, she sought out a notorious dockside tavern called the Gilded Prow, a place where Kyarth, The port captain, who asked dangerous questions, was rumored to gather her information. Every shadow in the narrow, refuse-strewn alley leading to the tavern door seemed to hold a threat, and she knew her search for an ally here could just as easily be a walk into a trap. The salty guar was a cave of smoke and low murmurs, smelling of stale ale and brine. Elara spotted Kyarth immediately, a woman whose presence commanded the room from a shadowed corner booth. Her skin was a tapestry of sun and ink, and as she shifted, the flickering candlelight revealed the ghostly lines of coastlines and sea monsters tattooed across her broad shoulders. Her eyes, sharp as flint, fixed on Elara with open suspicion. "You have the stink of the Imperial City on you," Scholar Kyarth grunted, not an accusation, but a statement of fact. She dismissed Elara's carefully prepared story with a wave of her calloused hand. "Trust is not given, it is earned in the dark." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "There is a man, a worm named Rolf the Eel. He stole a ledger of mine, one that holds tides and trade routes that do not exist. He hides in the sewers beneath the city, thinking the filth will protect him. Bring me my book." The challenge was a blade, testing her mettle. The Anvil sewers were a legend of their own, a labyrinthine tomb rumored to be home to everything from diseased rats to creatures of twisted magic. Elara was a scholar of parchment and theory, not a warrior or a rogue. Her muscles ached from the sea voyage, and her mind still felt raw from the magical strain of the storm. To descend into that darkness was to willingly step into a nightmare. Yet, Kyarth's distrust was a solid wall, and the ledger was the only key. Elara saw no other path forward. With a slow, deliberate nod, she accepted. The stench hit her first, a thick, physical presence of rot and decay that made her eyes water. The only light came from a faint, sickly green glow of phosphorescent fungus, clinging to the wet brick walls. Every scuttle and drip echoed in the oppressive silence, a symphony of unseen things moving in the water around her. She waded through knee-deep, stagnant water, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was a different kind of fear than the intellectual dread of the university. This was primal, a fear of teeth in the dark. She pressed on, clinging to the memory of the celestial map, using its impossible lines as a mantra to keep her terror at bay. She found Rolf the Eel in a cramped chamber, a niche formed by a collapsed archway. He was a gaunt, nervous man, surrounded by floating debris and the glint of stolen trinkets. The ledger was clutched in his hand. He hissed at her approach, his eyes wide with a rodent-like panic, and with a guttural shout, he summoned his protectors. From the murky water, two hulking, bipedal reptiles with milky white eyes and jagged teeth emerged. They were slaughterfish, but warped, grown to the size of men by the sewer's foul magic. Elara's mind raced. A direct confrontation was suicide. Instead, she focused her remaining, meager magicka not on the creatures, but on the crumbling brickwork above them. A simple force spell, a sharp, precise push. A shower of stone and mortar crashed down, stunning the beasts and trapping Rolf in his alcove. While they were disoriented, she darted forward, snatched the ledger from the eel's trapped hand, and fled back into the labyrinth, the enraged screeches of the creatures echoing behind her. She emerged from the sewer grate gasping, her robes stained and reeking, her body trembling with adrenaline and revulsion. Back in the tavern, she placed the waterlogged ledger on the table before Kyarth. The retired pirate examined it, then looked at Elara, truly looked at her for the first time. The hostility in her eyes had been replaced by a grim, measured respect. "You have more spine than I credited, scholar," Kyarth admitted, pouring a generous cup of cheap wine and pushing it across the table. She opened the ledger to a page filled with strange, looping script next to a sketched coastline. "This is not a map of a place, but of a time," she began, her voice low. "It speaks of the sunken kingdom of Aldmeris, not as a myth, but as a land that was physically erased. The erasers do not just burn maps, they alter the world itself, and the seas remember what the land has forgotten." Kyarth's tattoo was not ink and memory, but a living, breathing chart. As she focused, the lines on her back shimmered, the continents shifting in a subtle, almost imperceptible dance. "And here," she said, her voice a low tremor, her finger tracing a patch of unmarked skin along her spine, "this is where Strozemkai should be." It is not a blank space on a forgotten map. It is a void in the world itself. Elara felt the ground of her understanding fall away. An entire island, a place of history and people, had not been lost to time, but surgically removed from reality. The terror was immediate, a cold wave that left her breathless, but it was followed by a wild, exhilarating hope. If land could be erased, it could also be remembered. "We do not have time for your awe, scholar," Kyarth snapped, already pulling on a heavy leather jerkin. "The erasers are not just coming, they are here." "In the city, my contacts have gone silent. We leave before the dawn," but Elara could not move. To leave without a record was to let the truth vanish again. "I need to copy this," she insisted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I have a scroll, prepared with sympathetic inks. It will react to the magical resonance of your skin." Kyarth stared at her, a storm of conflict in her eyes, before giving a sharp, reluctant nod. "Be swift. This is a beacon they cannot ignore." The process was agonizing. Elara unrolled her blank scroll beside Kyarth, who stood motionless, her back a canvas of fading light. Elara's hands glowed with a soft, silver energy as she began the transcription, her fingers not touching the parchment, but moving in tandem with the shifting lines on Kyarth's skin. Each traced curve was a strain, a siphoning of magical essence that made the air hum. The specific coastline, the void where Strozemkai belonged, and the strange, deep ocean currents that swirled around the absence began to burn themselves onto the scroll. The tavern around them seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deepening as the ritual reached its peak. A bottle shattered upstairs. The tavern door splintered inward with a deafening crack. "They are here," Kyarth roared, snatching her axe from the table. Elara barely had time to roll the still-smoking scroll and shove it into her pack before Kyarth was dragging her toward a back hallway, away from the shouts and the glint of armored figures pouring into the common room. They burst out into a cold, mist-cloaked alley, the sounds of pursuit close behind. As they fled through the winding, refuse-strewn streets of Anvil, Kyarth shouted over her shoulder, "Our path leads inland now, to the high passes of the Dragontail Mountains. There is a monastery there, carved into the stone by hands that remembered a different sky." The salt air was gone, replaced by the chilling promise of ancient stone and thin, treacherous air. The thin air of the Dragontail Mountains burned in Elara's lungs with every desperate gasp. The narrow cliff path was a ribbon of crumbling stone, a 1,000-foot drop yawning on one side and an unyielding wall of rock on the other. Kyarth moved ahead of her, a solid, bleeding presence, her focus entirely on the treacherous footing. They had been climbing for 2 days, following the ghost of a coastline on the transcribed scroll toward a valley that modern cartography insisted was solid mountain. The silence of the high peaks was a lie. It shattered in an instant. The air to Elara's left shimmered, and a figure clad in gray robes materialized as if stepping through a curtain, a dagger aimed for her throat. Chameleon spells. They had walked right into an ambush. Shouts echoed from behind as more erasers revealed themselves, blocking their retreat. The path was too narrow for a real fight, a fact the erasers used to their advantage, forcing a confrontation where a single misstep meant oblivion. Kyarth roared, meeting the first attacker with her axe, the ring of steel against steel, unnaturally loud in the vast silence. An eraser lunged at Elara. Her mind, trained for theory and delicate magic, screamed in panic. She fumbled a basic ward, a shimmering disk of force that barely deflected the sword thrust. The impact sent a jolt of pain up her arm and scattered pebbles over the edge, their fall soundless into the mist below. This was not a duel. It was a butchering on a precipice. Another swing came, and she stumbled backward, her heel skidding on loose scree. The abyss seemed to pull at her. In that moment of pure terror, an old, almost forgotten lesson flashed in her mind, a primer on illusion she had dismissed as parlor tricks. Perception is a weapon. Instead of trying to match force with force, she twisted her will inward. She poured her fear and her remaining magicka into a single, desperate thought, a perfect copy of herself. The air beside the lead eraser wavered, and a second Elara appeared, lunging toward the cliff edge as if to leap. The eraser, his focus absolute, took the bait. He shifted his weight to intercept the phantom, his blade cutting through empty air. It was the opening Kyarth needed. With a guttural cry, she slammed the pommel of her axe into the man's exposed wrist. There was a sickening crack, and his sword clattered onto the stone. Elara let the illusion vanish, her body trembling with exhaustion. The remaining erasers, seeing their leader disarmed, hesitated for a critical second, then fell back, melting into the mountain shadows as quickly as they had appeared. The fight was over as suddenly as it began. Kyarth stood panting, a deep gash on her forearm, weeping blood onto the rock. She bound it roughly with a strip of cloth, her eyes never leaving their captive, who now knelt on the path, clutching his broken wrist. Elara's hands shook as she approached him. The scholarly part of her recoiled at the violence, at the raw, primal fear in the man's eyes. But the part of her that had seen a world, unmade, felt a cold, hard resolve. "You will tell us what you know," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Why is this valley worth killing for?" The eraser, a man with a lean, ascetic face, glared up at her with fanatical hatred. "You tread on sacred ground," he spat. "You seek to wake a sleeping dragon, to bring back the chaos. We are the scalpel that cuts away the world's cancer." His words were a familiar dogma, but his eyes flickered toward a specific peak, a jagged tooth of stone silhouetted against the sky. Under Kyarth's menacing presence and Elara's relentless questioning, his defiance crumbled. His mission was not just to stop them, but to secure the spire of the aligned stars. He confessed, his voice dropping to a resentful whisper. It is an Aelid observatory, not of stone and mortar, but carved from a single crystal heart. There, the Dwemer and the Aelids once worked in concert, not to simply watch the stars, but to chart their influence directly onto the bones of the world. The stars themselves were the original mapmakers. The admission hung in the thin, cold air. Kyarth was wounded. Elara was spent, but they now had a name for their destination, and a terrifying glimpse into the scale of the truth they pursued. The memory of the world was not just written on parchment or skin, but etched into the very firmament, and they were climbing toward the needle that had done the etching. The path ended not at a door, but at a wall of seamless, wind-sculpted rock. It was Kyarth, leaning heavily on her axe, who found the key. She pressed her bleeding palm against a section of stone that seemed no different from any other, and with a deep, grinding hum, the mountain opened. Before them lay the Aelid Observatory, a grove of crystalline arches soaring from a floor of polished obsidian, each curve aligned with a constellation no longer visible in the sky. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and petrified moss, a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Elara's stolen fragment grew warm against her chest, and the scroll copied from Kyarth's tattoo seemed to vibrate in her pack. She unrolled it, holding the parchment beside the celestial map. The lines of coast and star chart began to glow, their light projecting onto a central dais, causing a series of hidden crystals to flare with a soft, blue-white radiance. The obsidian floor parted without a sound, revealing a spiral staircase that plunged into absolute darkness. Kyarth sank to one knee, her face pale. "I cannot make that climb," she grunted, her voice strained with pain and frustration. "You must go down alone. I will hold this entrance until my last breath, or until you return." The trust in the captain's eyes was a heavier burden than any book or map. Elara nodded, her throat tight, and turned toward the abyss. The descent was endless, the air growing colder and denser with every step, the ancient magic of the place pressing against her thoughts like a blanket of static. It whispered of ages when the earth was soft, and will alone could carve a continent. Finally, her feet found level ground. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, and at its heart stood the Orrery. It was not a simple model of brass and wire. It was a perfect miniature Tamriel, sculpted from a single, colossal crystal, its mountains and rivers glowing with an inner light. The seas swirled with liquid silver, and as she approached, she saw the void where Stroh's Kai should have been, a dark, empty scar in the gemstone ocean. This was no representation, it was an interface. Hesitantly, she reached out and touched the central crystal, the heart of the model. The moment her fingers made contact, her mind was torn from her body. Visions assailed her, not as images, but as lived experiences. She felt the salt spray of a sea that no longer existed, walked the streets of a city built from pearl and coral, heard the voices of a people whose names were dust. She saw the crystal tower of Somerset, not as a monument, but as an anchor point, one of many that held the current shape of the world in place. And she saw the scalpel, the Eraser's intended tool. They did not mean to destroy the Orrery. They meant to use it to carefully, permanently excise every contradictory landmass, every inconvenient island, until the map matched their rigid, sterile doctrine. They sought to unmake history itself, to turn a living, breathing world into a flawless, unchanging prison. The terrifying truth was not just that the world had been changed, but that it could be changed again, and she was now standing at the controls. The crystal heart of the Orrery pulsed with ancient knowledge, a whisper of power that promised both ruin and revelation. Elara's mind, still reeling from the visions of a lost world, understood the terrible truth. The crystal compass was not a navigational tool. It was a key, a focusing lens designed to stabilize this very machine. Without it, the Orrery was a volatile engine, and any attempt to use it for large-scale geographical alteration would trigger a catastrophic collapse, unraveling the very fabric of Tamriel's reality. The Erasers did not seek to control history. They were going to shatter it. Her realization was a lightning strike. In her panic, her grip on the central crystal tightened, and a resonant chime echoed through the chamber, a deep, bell-like note that shook the obsidian floor. An alarm. From above, she heard the distant, frantic sounds of combat intensify. Kyarth's defiant roar, punctuated by the sharp crack of splintering crystal. The Erasers were breaking through. A choice tore at her. She could flee, carrying the warning of impending doom, but that would leave the ultimate weapon in the hands of fanatics. Or she could try to break it, to buy the world precious time. She had no skill for sabotage, only theory. A desperate, half-remembered formula surfaced in her thoughts, a powerful dispel designed to unravel complex enchantments. It was untested, reckless, a spell meant for minor wards, not a celestial engine. Casting it on the Orrery's core could be like using a hammer on a clockwork heart. But she had no other tools. Pouring every shred of her remaining will into the incantation, she slammed her palms against the glowing crystal. A silent shockwave of pure negation erupted from her hands. The light within the Orrery flickered and died, the liquid silver seas freezing solid. For one terrifying second, the entire structure groaned, threatening to implode, before settling into an unnerving, dormant silence. The spell had worked, but the feedback was a physical blow. A concussive force of reversed energy threw her backward. Her head struck the cold obsidian floor, and the world vanished into blackness. She awoke to the scrape of boots on stone and the cold pressure of a blade at her throat. Her vision swam, focusing on the lean, ascetic face of the lead eraser, kneeling over her. A cruel smile played on his lips. "Your companion is dead," he said, his voice dripping with triumphant venom. "Your struggle was a gift. You have confirmed the compass function, and in your clumsy attempt to break our prize, you have shown us exactly how to repair it." He held up her stolen fragment of parchment, the celestial alignment glowing faintly in the dark chamber. "This is the final cipher we needed. You have not saved the world, little scholar. You have delivered it to us." The rough rope bit into her wrists as they dragged her from the mountain's heart. She caught a single, horrifying glimpse of Kyarth, surrounded by gray robes, swinging her axe in a final, defiant arc before being swarmed under. A sharp crack, and the captain went still. Elara's own scream was a silent thing, choked by a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound. They threw her into a wagon, its walls humming with a dampening enchantment that made her thoughts feel thick and slow. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a darkness that was more than an absence of light. It was an absence of hope. Her pack was gone, the transcribed scroll, her notes, every physical proof of her journey stripped away. All she had left was the memory of failure. Had her entire quest, from that first moment in the university archive, been nothing more than a delivery service for the erasers. Had her curiosity, her defiance, simply handed them the final key to lock the world away forever, the despair was a weight threatening to crush her spirit into dust. But deep within that crushing darkness, a spark of her old stubbornness flared. They had taken her maps, but they could not take her mind. She closed her eyes against the oppressive gloom and began to rebuild. She started with the Orrery, visualizing every glowing river, every mountain range carved from crystal, the exact feel of the central heart under her palm. She etched the vision of the lost coastline from Kyarth's tattoo into her memory, then the celestial alignment from her stolen fragment. She mapped the sounds of the journey, the scent of the sea in Anvil, the feel of the high mountain air. She was no longer a cartographer of parchment, but a cartographer of memory, and she would make her mind a vault they could not break. For days, the magically sealed wagon rolled east, the monotonous rhythm of the wheels a torture. She focused on the sounds outside, the changing textures of the road, the subtle drop in temperature. She heard her captors' voices through the wood, their conversations casual and confident. One word, spoken with grim satisfaction, cut through her concentration. The spire. They spoke of returning to the spire in the Jural Mountains, where the crystal compass awaited its final alignment. The wagon jolted violently to a halt, throwing her against the wall. Shouts echoed outside, followed by the screech of an unlocking mechanism. A sliver of blinding white light cut through a crack in the wooden planks. Elara pressed her eye to it, and her breath caught. There they were, the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Jural Mountains, sharp as knives against a hard, cold sky. Her final trial was not ahead. It had already begun. The cell walls were a mosaic of her own failure. Every tile was a fragment of a purged map, a sliver of coastline, or a forgotten mountain range meticulously arranged into a beautiful, mocking prison. Elara traced the lines with her eyes, not with a scholar's curiosity now, but with the desperate focus of a caged animal searching for a crack in the world. This was the Erasure Stronghold, a fortress carved into the heart of the Jural Mountains, and her sanity depended on finding a pattern in the chaos. Days bled together in the dim, mage-lit gloom, but her mind, sharpened by memory and rage, began to see it. The tiles were not random. A specific river on one wall flowed directly into a mountain range on another, a cartographic continuity that defied the decorative intent. It was a hidden map within the map, a path laid out by some long-dead artisan who had defied the erasers from within their own walls. The path led to a single, almost imperceptible tile depicting a rose, set low in the corner where the wall met the floor. Hope, cold and fragile, began to thaw the numbness in her chest. Her discovery coincided with a new, subtle variable, a young guard who brought her meager rations. His eyes, unlike the others, held no fanaticism, only a weary vigilance. One evening, as he slid a bowl of watery gruel through the slot, his fingers lingered, and a sliver of cold, hardened metal was pressed into her palm. He did not look at her, his voice a breath so faint she almost missed it. "The Cyphers remember their friends," he whispered, "but the lock is warded. If you try and fail, the enchantment will scream." He moved away, his boots echoing down the hall, leaving her with a lockpick and a choice that felt like a cliff's edge. To trust him was to gamble her life on a stranger's glance. He could be an eraser testing her, a trap laid with exquisite cruelty, but the pattern in the tiles felt like a message, and the lockpick felt like an answer. The memory of Kyarth's final stand solidified her resolve. She would not die in this beautiful cell. She would either escape or force them to kill her trying. The hours until the guard change stretched into an eternity. When the corridor outside fell into the deep silence of the mountain night, she knelt before the cell door, the cool metal of the pick a familiar, terrifying weight in her fingers. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, so loud she was sure it would betray her. She inserted the pick, her senses stretched to their limit, feeling for the intricate, magical tumblers the guard had warned her about. It was a dance with a silent, lethal partner. One wrong twist, 1 millimeter of miscalculation, and the ward would trigger, bringing the entire fortress down upon her. The final tumbler gave way with a soft, definitive click that was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The door swung inward a silent inch. Elara slipped into the dark corridor, the cold mountain air biting at her skin. The path ahead was a mystery, a labyrinth of stone and fanaticism, but the thrum of immense power pulled at her like a lodestone, guiding her toward the heart of the mountain, where the erasers were preparing to rewrite reality. The thrum of power became a physical pressure, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in her teeth and bones. Elara followed the sound, a moth drawn to a deadly flame, until she reached a gallery overlooking a chamber so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow. Below, the erasers had built their blasphemy. A massive, circular device of polished brass and obsidian dominated the floor, its surface etched with glowing lines that mirrored the coastlines of Black Marsh. At its heart, suspended in a cage of pure energy, was the crystal compass, pulsing with a sickly green light, and surrounding the device, bound to crystalline pillars with chains of solidified shadow, were the prisoners. Her breath caught. There was Kyarth, slumped but conscious, her tattoos dull and lifeless. Beside her were others, men and women she did not know, their faces drawn with agony. Thin, luminous tendrils of energy were being siphoned from their bodies, flowing into the machine to fuel its terrible purpose. The lead eraser stood at a central console, his voice a low chant as he manipulated the controls. With every syllable, a section of the glowing map of Black Marsh flickered and began to fade, as if being washed away by an invisible tide. They were not just unmapping the land. They were unmaking it, using the very life force of those who remembered it to power the erasure. A direct assault was suicide. She was one woman against a room full of fanatics, with innocent lives serving as the ritual's battery. Her mind raced, discarding plan after plan. Then she saw them, the great light crystals set in ornate sconces along the gallery walls, their brilliant illumination fueling the chamber's stark clarity. They were a vulnerability, a simple, brute force spell of kinetic energy focused on the base of the nearest crystal. It was a risk, a blunt instrument in a room of delicate, catastrophic magic, but it was the only tool she had. She gathered her will, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the focused strain. With a sharp, pushing motion, she unleashed the spell. The crystal shattered with a sound like 1,000 bells breaking, and the chamber was plunged into a chaotic half-light. Shouts of confusion erupted below. In that single moment of disorientation, Elara moved. She vaulted over the gallery railing, landing in a roll on the main floor and sprinting toward the central console. The lead eraser turned, his face a mask of fury, but she was already upon him. She slammed her hands onto the console, not with a spell of destruction, but with one of chaotic disruption, pouring all her will into scrambling the precise magical frequencies that powered the device. The machine groaned in protest. The stable green light of the compass flared into a violent, strobing crimson. The energy tendrils connecting the prisoners to the pillars flickered wildly, and the map of Black Marsh wavered, its fading borders solidifying and then bleeding back into confused, unstable light. The lead eraser was on her in an instant, his blade a silver flash in the erratic glare. He disarmed her with a brutal twist of his wrist, sending her stumbling back. "You are a flaw in the pattern," he snarled, his voice dripping with a hatred as cold as the mountain peak, "and I am the hand that smooths the parchment." He advanced, his weapon poised for a final strike, but before he could lunge, the entire fortress shuddered. A deep, grinding roar echoed from the mountain's core as the destabilized ritual energy, with no clean outlet, rebounded back into the machine and the stone around it. The ground beneath their feet cracked, and the fate of Black Marsh and everyone in the chamber tore free from anyone's control. The Master Eraser moved like a flaw in reality itself. His form blurred and split, creating shimmering afterimages that lunged at Elara from all sides. She dodged a blade that was not there, only to feel the real one slice through her sleeve. This was not a duel of force, but a battle of perception. Every spell he cast was a lie given power. He warped the stone beneath her feet into quicks, and only her memory of the chamber's true layout, the precise dimensions she had noted as a scholar, told her it was an illusion. She held her ground, and the stone remained solid. Her knowledge of maps was her only shield. She saw the patterns in his assaults, the way his magic flowed like ink across a page, always seeking to redraw the truth. He was trying to map her defeat, and she had to counter-cartograph his every move. She feigned a desperate, clumsy lunge toward the central console, pouring her remaining magicka into a visible, crackling bolt of energy aimed at the machine's heart. It was a bluff, a poorly drawn decoy. The Master Eraser took the bait with a condescending smirk, redirecting his power to erect a massive, shimmering ward around the device. He had overextended his defenses, leaving his own position exposed for a single, critical second. In that moment, Elara twisted her spell. The energy she had feigned at the console arced sideways, not at the machine, but at the pulsing, sickly heart of the ritual itself, the crystal compass suspended in its energy cage. Her bolt struck true. The compass did not just break, it screamed. A wave of raw, unchained magicka, the accumulated power of half-erased continents, exploded outward. The blast was a silent, concussive sheet of white light that hurled the Master Eraser against the far wall. He slumped to the ground, unconscious, his intricate illusions dissolving into nothing. But the victory was instantly swallowed by a greater calamity. The chamber groaned as if in mortal pain. Cracks webbed across the ceiling, and great slabs of stone began to plummet into the abyss below. The released energy was tearing the fortress apart from the inside. The ritual was broken, but the mountain itself was now rejecting the blasphemy carved into its heart. Elara scrambled to her feet, her ears ringing. She had to move. The chains of solidified shadow binding Kyarth and the other prisoners flickered, their power source severed. A few solid blows from a fallen piece of masonry shattered them. Kyarth stumbled free, catching Elara's arm, her grip still fierce. "We need to go now," the captain rasped, her eyes scanning the collapsing chamber for a path out. The way they had come was already sealed by a cascade of rock. Their only hope was a secondary passage, a narrow service tunnel she had spotted during her capture, now revealed by the falling debris. The race against the mountain's fury had begun. The passage was a tight, suffocating darkness, the air thick with dust and the mountain's dying roar. Elara pushed Kyarth and the other dazed prisoners ahead of her, their frantic footsteps echoing in the narrow service tunnel. Behind them, the sound of splintering stone was chased by a ragged, furious scream. The Master Eraser was coming, a vengeful ghost refusing to be buried. He was wounded, his power fractured, but his will was a blade honed by fanaticism, sharp enough to kill them all. The tunnel shook violently, and with a deafening crunch, the world ahead vanished behind a wall of collapsed rock and packed earth. They were trapped. The exit was sealed. From the darkness behind, the slow, dragging footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the wet, ragged sound of his breathing. He was close enough now that Elara could feel the hate rolling off him in waves. There was no time for deliberation, no alternative path. She had one choice left. Placing her palms against the cold, unyielding rubble, Elara poured the very last dregs of her magicka into a final, desperate spell. This was not the delicate force she had used in the sewers. This was a raw, telekinetic shove, a blast of pure will meant to move a mountain. The strain was immediate and excruciating, a white-hot fire behind her eyes that felt like her mind was tearing itself apart. Gritting her teeth against a scream, she pushed. The rubble shuddered, then exploded outward in a shower of stone and dirt, revealing a sliver of blinding white sky and a shock of freezing air. The effort emptied her completely. Her legs buckled, and the world swam into gray static as strong hands, Kyarth's hands, caught her and hauled her through the new opening. They stumbled out into the knee-deep snow of a high mountain pass, the wind whipping at them with bitter fury. Elara, barely conscious, managed to turn her head for one last look. The entire peak of the mountain, the heart of the Erasure stronghold, groaned one final time and then collapsed in on itself in a silent, billowing cloud of snow and pulverized stone. The implosion was terrifyingly quiet, a giant swallowing itself whole. The entrance, the machines, the Master Eraser, all of it was gone, sealed under 1,000,000 tons of rock and ice forever. She collapsed into the snow, her body numb, her mind a hollow shell. The immediate, world-ending threat was over, buried under the very geography it had sought to control. But as she lay there gasping in the thin, cold air, a deeper truth settled over her. This was not a victory. It was a stalemate. The secret war for the memory of the world had not ended. It had simply lost its central battlefield, and the scattered factions were still out there, waiting in the shadows. The snows of Bruma were a different kind of prison. Inside a safe house, smelling of pine resin and old books, Elara's body mended while her mind replayed the mountain's collapse on a loop. The silence was not peaceful. It was the quiet of a storm, gathering its strength elsewhere. With Kyarth's gruff encouragement, she began the painstaking work of documentation, not on parchment this time, but but in a cipher of her own devising, translating every memory of the Orrery, the Eraser's fanaticism, and the feel of unraveling magic into a new, secret atlas. Her testimony made her a legend among the scattered members of the Cyphers Guild, a name whispered with respect in candle-lit back rooms. To the wider world, however, she was a fugitive. The Imperial authorities fed a sanitized story by the Eraser's remaining sympathizers, listed her as a dangerous radical, a thief and vandal responsible for the destabilizing magical event in the Gerals. She was a hero in the shadows and a criminal in the light. The choice before her was a fork in a road she had never meant to travel. She could disappear completely, adopt a new name in a distant province, and let the truth remain a secret guarded by a few. Or she could step into the open, use her notoriety to shout the conspiracy from the rooftops of the Imperial City, and risk being silenced forever. The scholar in her longed for that vindication, for the academic world to be shaken by her discoveries. But the woman who had seen Kyarth bleed and a mountain die knew better. A public revelation would be a swift suicide, and her message would die with her. Truth, she realized, was too fragile to survive the spotlight. It needed to be planted in the dark, where it could grow roots deep enough to withstand any storm. Her decision was quiet, final, and life-altering. She would not be a martyr. She would be a warden, working from the shadows with the guild. She would use her hard-won knowledge to protect other vulnerable fragments, to identify historical sites the Erasers might target next, and to quietly guide a new generation of secret cartographers. This path offered no glory, no return to the hallowed halls of the university. It meant her old life, her identity as a promising scholar, was irrevocably gone, sacrificed to a cause far greater than any single career. She had traded a future of respect for a perpetual present of danger, becoming a permanent guardian of everything the world was meant to forget. As the deep winter snows began to thaw, dripping from the eaves of Bruma's sturdy buildings, a sealed message arrived by Raven. It bore the guild's subtle wax seal. Elara broke it, her hand steady now, and read the brief lines. The explosion of the crystal compass had not vaporized it. Instead, its fragments, each humming with residual, unstable power, had been flung across Tamriel by the released energy. One piece was rumored to be in the possession of a reclusive Telvanni wizard in Morrowind. Another was said to have been found near the sunken ruins of a Dwemer city in Skyrim. The message ended with a single, urgent question. The compass was broken, but were its pieces now seeds of a new, even more unpredictable mystery? The hidden workshop in the Bruma catacombs was a sanctuary of whispered secrets and spectral light. Here, far from the eyes of the world, Elara began her great work. She covered the walls in blank vellum, and with inks mixed with crushed glow dust and memory, she started to draw. Her hand moved not from reference, but from the vivid cartography etched into her mind, recreating the true shape of Tamriel as she had seen it in the crystal orrery and on Kyarth's skin. It was an act of profound defiance, stitching the world's forgotten body back together, one remembered line at a time. Her first completed section was a revelation that made the very air in the chamber grow still. It showed a massive, ancient land bridge, a stone serpent of a landmass that had once stretched between the pale shores of Skyrim and the ashy coast of Morrowind. This was not a sunken continent or a lost island. This was a connection, a geological fact that rewrote the entire history of northern Tamriel. Its existence suggested that the first Nords and the early Dunmer had not been isolated peoples, but neighbors who could have walked to each other's lands. The implications for trade, for cultural exchange, for the very origins of their civilizations were staggering. This single discovery could reshape borders and topple merchant dynasties built on sea lane monopolies. The revelation tore open a deep and immediate conflict within the Cyphers Guild, a faction of radicals led by a fiery young cartographer named Thuron, saw the land bridge as a weapon to be unleashed. They argued that such a truth, made public, would shatter the foundations of the Empire's sanctioned history and finally expose the Eraser's lies for all to see. They wanted to create chaos, believing it was the only way to burn the old world down and build a new one. Opposing them were the conservatives, older members who had survived by staying in the deepest shadows. They viewed the land bridge map with terror, insisting that releasing it would trigger political upheaval, border wars, and a purge that would destroy the guild forever. In their eyes, the truth was too dangerous to ever see the light of day. Elara found herself standing squarely between these two raging currents. She had seen the cost of both fanatical secrecy and reckless revelation. She addressed the divided guild, her voice calm but unwavering. "We do not hide the truth, and we do not weaponize it," she stated. "We steward it. We must release these discoveries gradually to carefully chosen scholars, engineers, and leaders who have shown the capacity to handle such knowledge without causing panic. We must prove the world can bear its own true history." Her moderate stance was a precarious victory. It won her the loyalty of the guild's silent majority, those who were weary of endless shadow warfare and yearned for a lasting impact. They saw in her a new kind of leader, one who valued wisdom over zealotry, but her decision also carved new, bitter enemies from within their own ranks. Thuron and his radicals now saw her as a coward, a gatekeeper who was no better than the university mages she had fled. The conservatives, meanwhile, distrusted her new protocol, fearing that any release of information, no matter how controlled, was the first step toward their annihilation. The unity of the guild, their greatest strength, was now fractured because of her. The tension in the catacombs became a palpable thing, a cold draft that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was in this climate of fragile alliances and simmering resentment that a coded letter, smelling faintly of desert spices and moon sugar, found its way to her workbench. The script was elegant and unfamiliar. It was from a new contact in the port city of Sensual, Elsewhere. The message was brief and cryptic, hinting at a map unlike any other. It spoke of a chart that did not record the world as it was, or as it had been, but one that shimmered with potential, predicting the very coastlines of tomorrow. The coded letter from Sensual smelled of cinnamon and strange dust. Its words promised a map of tomorrow, a concept that both chilled and electrified Elara. Leaving the fractured tensions of the guild behind, she journeyed south into the arid heat of Elsewhere, following the cryptic directions to a secluded canyon where the air itself seemed to hum with latent magic. She found the cartographer, an elderly Kajiat named Rajhin, in a cave dwelling whose walls were covered not with parchment, but with intricate sand murals that shifted in the moonlight. His eyes, vast and luminous, held the weary knowledge of one who has seen too many dawns. He did not consult charts or stars. He explained in a voice like shifting gravel. The twin moons, Joan and Jode, gifted him his maps in dreams, showing him the slow, inexorable dance of continents yet to come. With a reverent paw, he unrolled a scroll of woven moon silk. The image upon it stole the breath from Elara's lungs. This was Tamriel, but not as she had ever known it. Warden fell was shattered, its central volcano a caldera, flooded by a new inland sea. The coast of Hammerfell had advanced, swallowing cities whole, while strange, jagged islands had risen from the Abessian Sea. Solitude was depicted as a city of ruins, perched on a newly carved fjord. It was a vision of geological apocalypse and rebirth, 1,000 years of change captured on a single, terrifying page. The awe she felt was immediately tempered by a profound dread. This was not a history to be recovered, but a fate to be witnessed in advance. Such a vision does not come without cost, little keeper of lost things, Rajhin purred, his tail twitching. His price was not gold. He demanded she use her growing influence to halt a mining operation run by the Sanguine Sun Trading Company, which was tearing apart the face of a nearby mesa. The site was not rich in ore, he insisted, but was a sacred lunar alignment point, a place where the light of the moons focused on certain nights to reveal celestial pathways. Its desecration was a spiritual crime that would blind him to future dreams. The request placed Elara at a crossroads. She was a scholar and a secret warden, not a political activist. Yet, as she looked from the prophetic scroll back to the Kajiat's earnest face, she understood that her role as a guardian had to evolve. Protecting the past was meaningless if she did not also safeguard the tools needed to understand the future. She agreed. The conflict was immediate and dangerous. The Sanguine Sun Company was no simple commercial enterprise. Her discreet inquiries revealed its backers were powerful nobles from Cyrodiil, individuals whose names were whispered in connection with the scattered, but still potent, remnants of the Erasure faction. This was not a simple matter of profit. It was an ideological attack, a deliberate effort to destroy a site that could produce knowledge outside their controlled, static version of reality. A direct assault was impossible. Instead, Elara wielded a new kind of weapon, information. She leaked carefully curated documents to sympathetic scholars in the university, highlighting the mesa's historical and arcane significance. She anonymously provided local Kajiat tribes with legal precedents to challenge the mining permit. She used the Cyphers network to spark a public appeal, framing the issue not as a mystical secret, but as the preservation of a unique cultural heritage. The pressure mounted, and within a month, the imperial officials, wary of the bad press and scholarly outrage, revoked the company's license. Elara returned to Rajhin's cave in triumph, the sound of mining equipment replaced by the desert wind. The old Kajiat nodded, a slow, satisfied gesture, and placed the moon silk scroll into her hands. The weight of the future felt immense, but her victory was Pyrrhic. The powerful nobles whose investment she had thwarted now knew her name. They understood that the fugitive scholar was no longer just a keeper of old secrets, but an active and effective opponent. She had gained a map of tomorrow, but in doing so, she had painted a target on her back for some of the most vindictive and well-connected people in Tamriel. The shadows she relied on for safety were growing thinner by the day. The moon's silk scroll felt unnervingly warm in Elara's hands as she faced the gathered leaders of the Cyphers guild in the Bruma catacombs. She unrolled it across the central table, the shifting, alien coastlines of a future Tamriel casting a pale, spectral light on their grim faces. Silence fell, thick and heavy. This was not a relic to be preserved, but a verdict to be debated. The radicals, led by Thuron, saw an imperative for action. If we know a city will be swallowed by the sea, we have a moral duty to evacuate it now, he argued, his voice sharp with conviction. To stand by and do nothing makes us accomplices to the coming disaster. The conservative faction recoiled in horror. You speak of preventing a cataclysm, but what if our very intervention is the spark that ignites it? Countered an older scribe named Lyris, her hands trembling. We could turn a potential future into an absolute certainty through our own meddling. Elara listened, her own stomach churning with a profound ethical vertigo. Was it wiser to let a river of time flow unchecked, or to build a dam based on a single, uncertain vision? She thought of the mountain collapsing, of the unintended consequences of every choice. We cannot claim the arrogance of gods, she finally said, her voice cutting through the heated debate. But we cannot claim the innocence of bystanders, either. Her proposed compromise was a tightrope walk. The guild would establish discreet, long-term observation posts at the key locations marked on the Prophetic map: Warden Fell, the shifting coasts of Hammerfell, the new fjords near Solitude. They would watch, record, and analyze, gathering data on the most minute geological and magical shifts, but they would not intervene, not unless they witnessed a clear, present, and immediate danger that aligned with the prophecy, a distinction that satisfied no one completely, but was accepted as the only path forward. This new policy, the first of its kind, formally bound the guild to the burden of foresight. It was a historic moment, but the tension in the room did not dissipate. It merely went underground, simmering in the disapproving glances of both factions. That night, alone in her workshop, surrounded by the ghostly maps of past and future, a new pressure began to build in the air, a scent of ozone and rusted metal. The very stone of the wall before her shimmered, its solidity dissolving into a vortex of chaotic color and shrieking silence. From the heart of the shifting portal, a voice spoke, its tone a symphony of polished blades and broken promises. It praised her discerning eye, her growing collection of impossible geographies. It offered her a gift, a true and complete map of the realms of oblivion, in exchange for a simple thing, her service. The voice from the shimmering vortex was a library of corroded whispers, an avatar of Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge, coalesced from the swirling chaos, a form of restless tentacles and countless blinking eyes. It praised her discerning eye, her growing collection of impossible geographies. It offered her a gift, a true and complete map of the realms of oblivion, in exchange for a simple thing, her service. The temptation was a physical ache. Here was the answer to every mystery that had haunted her since the Arcane University, a key to every lock the Erasers had ever sealed. She could know it all, every sunken kingdom and every shifted coastline, in an instant. Her thirst for understanding warred with a deep, instinctual revulsion. This was not knowledge earned through struggle and study. It was information purchased with her soul, to be hoarded in a realm of madness. She thought of Kyarth, of the guild, of the principle that truth must be shared to have any value at all. With a strength that felt borrowed, she met the gaze of a dozen floating eyes. True knowledge is a path you walk, not a prize you are handed, she declared, her voice shaking but clear. I will not trade my will for your archives. The air froze. The symphony of whispers sharpened into a singular, silent shriek of pure malice. Foolish mortal, the prince hissed, his form beginning to unravel back into the vortex. You value the journey, then you shall be condemned to an endless one. A tendril of pure shadow lashed out, not to strike her body, but her very connection to the art she loved. It felt like a siphon attached to her spirit. As the portal collapsed, the curse took hold. The spectral lines on her wall maps flickered. The freshly drawn land bridge on her central vellum began to fade at the edges, as if being washed away by an invisible tide. A cold horror gripped her. She poured her own magicka into the parchment, a desperate act of reinforcement, and the lines stabilized, but the drain was constant, a leak in her very being. She was now a warden, not just of maps, but of their very existence, forced to fuel them with her own life force. Cursed but resolute, she knew she could not face this alone. Gathering her remaining strength, she turned to the fractured guild, her greatest hope and her greatest vulnerability. She would have to reveal her weakness to those who already questioned her leadership, trusting that their shared purpose was stronger than the Daedric poison now coursing through her work. The marshes of Black Marsh breathed with a malevolent sentience, every gnarled root and patch of quicks, and seemed to shift the moment Elara looked away, the land itself recoiling from the recent, violent attempt to unmake it. Her curse was a constant drain, a cold whisper in her blood. The expedition's maps, carefully prepared by the guild, bled ink before their eyes, coastlines dissolving into formless smudges as her own life force failed to sustain them. They were navigating a living, hostile geography with a compass that spun in useless circles. Her only hope lay in trusting the two Argonian guides, Uth and Vilusa, whose understanding of the land was not drawn on parchment, but sung in ancient, sibilant verses. They read the subtle languages of the water, the specific croak of a tree frog, and the bend of a reed, navigating the treacherous paths where her maps showed only blank, fading spaces. It was a profound surrender for a cartographer to trust the memory of a people over the certainty of ink. The journey was a slow, exhausting battle against a world that did not want them. The air, thick with the smell of decay and vibrant, alien blooms, clung to their lungs. Visions flickered at the edge of Elara's sight, whispers of the hissed trees that watched their every move. The curse twisted the landscape, causing solid ground to ripple like water and familiar star patterns to writhe in the night sky. Uth would often pause, his head tilted, listening to a silence that seemed to speak to him alone before redirecting their path away from a patch of ground that looked no different from any other, but which he insisted held only a sucking, hungry death. They found the flower in a clearing that felt more like a cathedral. It grew in a circle of pure black earth, its petals a luminous, impossible blue that seemed to drink the murky light. But their prize was guarded. The massive, ancient hissed tree at the center of the clearing did not move, yet its presence was a physical weight. A wave of psychic force struck them, not with words, but with raw, terrifying emotion. Elara was suddenly drowning in the memory of 1,000 lost marshes, feeling the agony of lands severed from the whole. She saw Kyarth, not as a companion, but as a desecrator with an axe, and felt an overwhelming urge to attack her. Velusa cried out, clawing at her own scales as she relived an ancestral memory of slavery. The tree was communicating its displeasure, defending its charge by turning their own minds against them. Fighting was not an option. Pushing back against the psychic assault with the last dregs of her will, Elara did the only thing she could think of. She approached the Hist, not with a weapon, but with an offering. From her pack, she drew the most precious copy of her true Tamriel map, the one showing the ancient land bridge and the unaltered coastlines. She laid it at the tree's colossal roots. "This is a memory your people share." She projected her thoughts into the swirling chaos of her own mind, a truth that was almost lost. "I offer it back to you, in exchange for the means to continue my work." The violent hallucinations ceased instantly. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, a sensation of ancient, slow consideration. A single, gnarled root uncoiled from the base of the Hist, gently nudging the map, and then pointed a dripping tip toward the glowing blue flower. The permission was granted. With reverent hands, Kyarth harvested a single blossom, its luminescence seeming to seep into his scales. As he placed it in a prepared, lead-lined box, Elara felt the cold, draining pressure of the Daedric curse shatter like glass. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, a warmth flooding back into limbs she had not realized were so numb. The lines on the maps in her pack did not immediately restore themselves, but the constant, sickening fade was gone. The land, while still treacherous, felt solid and real once more. They had won their cure, but at a cost Elara was only beginning to comprehend. She had traded a fragment of the world's true history, a secret she had sworn to protect for her own survival. The Hist now held a truth that could reshape the North, and she had no way of knowing if it was a guardian or a future player in the secret war for Tamriel's memory. The night air in the Arcane University district was thick with the scent of old rain and older magic. Elara moved through the familiar shadows with a new kind of silence, not that of a fugitive, but of a ghost revisiting a former life. The curse was gone, but its memory was a cold stone in her pocket, a reminder of the price of knowledge. Her destination was the restricted section, a place she had once needed permission to even glance toward. Now she was the one granting permission, leaving a gift in the dark. She slid the cylinder containing a copy of her true map, showing the ancient land bridge and unaltered coasts, into a gap between two heavy treatises on theoretical thaumaturgy. It was a seed planted in stony ground, waiting for the right scholar, the one with enough curiosity and courage to find it and begin to question everything. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned, her hand instinctively going to a hidden dagger, to find Senior Mage Valerius standing in the gloom. The arrogant rigidity she remembered was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. His robes were slightly askew, and his eyes would not meet hers for long. "I heard whispers of your return," he said, his voice raspy. "I have spent many nights considering that fragment I took from you. In my zeal to protect doctrine, I became an instrument of its greatest lie. I am sorry." The apology hung in the silent air, a fragile, unexpected thing. This was the man who had shattered her academic future, who had represented everything she fought against. The old anger was a cold ember, but it still held heat. To forgive him felt like a betrayal of the terrified apprentice she had been. Yet, she saw the genuine guilt in his stooped shoulders, the intellectual shame of a man realizing his life's work was built on a curated falsehood. Her decision was not about forgiveness for his sake, but for the cause itself. An ally inside the university, a man with his access and influence, was a weapon the guild had never possessed. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Your regret is noted, Valerius, but regret is a passive thing. If you wish to atone, action is required. She handed him not a map, but a single, blank piece of high-quality vellum. If your conscience truly guides you, write the word compass upon this, and leave it in the hollow of the old oak, near the eastern gate. A friend will collect it. It was a test, and a profound risk. He could take this information straight to the remaining Erasure sympathizers and dismantle her entire network. He took the vellum with a hand that trembled slightly, his expression one of grim resolve. He understood the magnitude of the trust she was offering, however cautiously. I will, he whispered. Thank you. Then he turned and melted back into the archives, a changed man in a place that had not yet changed. As Elara slipped out into the cool night, a quiet sense of completion settled over her. This was not a triumphant homecoming, but a reclamation. She had faced the ghost of her past, and instead of fighting it, had given it a purpose. The chasm between the hidden truth keepers and the official gatekeepers of knowledge had just been bridged by a single, hesitant step. The work of healing the world's memory would be a task for generations, but for the first time, she could see the fragile, possible shape of its beginning. The true atlas began not as a single book, but as a constellation of recovered truths. In the deepest chamber of the Bruma catacombs, Elara and her most trusted allies laid out the ghostly coastline from Kyarth's tattoo beside Rajhin's prophetic scroll and the painstakingly redrawn land bridge. Their goal was audacious, to weave every fragmented truth into one master document, a living history of Tamriel written in ink, memory, and magic. Each new page was a victory and a vulnerability, the act of recording a lost island or a future fjord, sending ripples through the magical currents that the Erasers and their allies could potentially detect. They worked by the light of enchanted crystals, their voices hushed, knowing that every stroke of the pen was an act of rebellion that could bring the roof down upon them. The most heated debates, however, were not about the mortal world. As the Atlas took shape, a fundamental question divided the core group. Should they include the realms of oblivion? Thuron argued fiercely that to ignore the Daedric plains was to draw a map of a house, but omit its shadow, creating a dangerously incomplete picture. The conservatives recoiled, fearing that to chart that chaos was to invite its gaze, to become cartographers of madness itself. Elara listened to the arguments. The memory of Hermaeus Mora's offer a cold stain on her thoughts. She understood the peril, but she also knew that ignorance was a far more fragile shield. Her decision was a characteristically careful compromise. The Daedric realms would be included, but in a separate, heavily encrypted volume, its pages sealed with wards and ciphers that only a handful of the guild's most senior and stable members could ever hope to unlock. This volume on oblivion would not be a guide for travelers, but a warning for guardians. When the final page of the true atlas was secured, the air in the chamber seemed to thicken with its significance. They had created the most dangerous object in Tamriel, a book that could rewrite history, predict the future, and exposed the anatomy of reality itself. It was a prize that every remaining Erasure, every power-hungry noble, and every curious Deirdre would burn the world to possess. It could not remain in a catacomb beneath a city. The solution was carved from the heart of their oldest trauma, deep beneath the Geralt Mountains, in a new cavern far from the collapsed Erasure stronghold. The guild constructed a hidden library. It was a fortress of knowledge, its doors hidden by illusion, its corridors protected by geological traps and psychic sentinels. They built it with the lessons of the past etched into every stone, a silent, secure vault to protect the truth they had almost died to recover. The air in the mountain library was as still and cold as polished marble. Before the sealed vault that held the true atlas, Elara and the senior members of the Cyphers guild stood in a circle, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a single, hovering crystal. One by one, they spoke the words of the Keeper's Oath, a vow not just of loyalty, but of magical symbiosis, as each member swore to protect the Atlas and the philosophy of truthful cartography. A faint, silver thread of light bloomed from their chest, connecting them to the vault's core. The magic was permanent, a soul-deep commitment that would resonate within them, a silent alarm that would scream across any distance if the Atlas were ever threatened. A few members hesitated, their hands trembling slightly before they spoke. The idea of a spell that could not be broken, that would bind them until death, was a terrifying prospect. Yet, looking around the circle at the faces of those who had also lost so much, they found their resolve. One by one, every voice joined the chorus, their collective will forging a new, unbreakable unity for the guild. When it was her turn, Elara did not simply swear the oath. She stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering, as she volunteered to become the primary keeper. This was not a title of honor, but a sentence of solitude. It meant her life would be spent within the stone walls of this mountain, the guardian who would never stray far from her charge. She was trading the open world for a single, vital point upon its map, a profound sacrifice to ensure the greater good. As the last echoes of the vows faded into the stone, a young apprentice, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, approached Elara. The primary keeper felt the weight of her new isolation already pressing in, but the girl's question was a spark in the gloom. "Could you teach me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How do you learn to draw what the world wants to forget?" In that question, Elara saw not an end, but a fragile beginning, the first thread of a new tapestry being woven by hands that had never known the comfort of a simple lie. The stone walls of the mountain library absorbed the apprentice's eager questions, and Elara found her days slowly refilling with a purpose beyond mere guardianship. Her new student, a young Nord named Rolf, possessed a brilliant mind for patterns and a frustrating disregard for caution. His energy was a stark contrast to the library's deep silence, a flickering torch in a hall of cold, steady crystals. She began his education not with ink and parchment, but with stories. She taught him the history of the Secret War, the cost of a single misplaced line, and the profound weight of the Keeper's Oath. She explained that every map they protected was a living entity, its truth capable of toppling empires or saving them. Rolf listened, but his eyes often strayed to the sealed vault, burning with a hunger for the grand adventure he believed cartography to be. He saw the maps as keys to unlock the world's wonders, not as fragile artifacts in a perpetual, shadowy conflict. His enthusiasm soon outpaced his patience. He became obsessed with a single, cryptic notation on Rajhin's prophetic scroll, a reference to a whispering canyon in the Alakar desert of Hammerfell. The scroll hinted that the canyon's unique acoustics could capture and replay sounds from the future, a tantalizing prospect for any student of prophecy. Elara expressly forbade any investigation, warning him that the location was uncharted for a reason, its dangers unknown, and its connection to the prophecy dangerously vague. To her, it was a potential trap. To Rolf, it was a test of his worth. One morning, he was gone, leaving only a hastily scribbled note of apology and a promise to prove himself. Elara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach, the familiar chill of a mistake about to unfold. The protective part of her screamed to drag him back immediately, to lock the doors and keep him safe within the mountain's heart. But the teacher in her, the woman who had learned every lesson the hard way, knew that some truths could only be understood through failure. She would not stop him. But she would not abandon him, either. Gathering her own weathered gear, she slipped out into the pale dawn light, a silent shadow on his trail. The journey to the Alakar was a lesson in tracking and worry. She followed the clear, impulsive trail he left, her heart sinking with every fresh footprint in the sand. The Whispering Canyon was a deep, narrow fissure in the red rock, and as she approached, she could hear it, a low hum that seemed to vibrate in her teeth. It was not the sound of the future, however. It was the sound of the present, dangerously amplified. Peering over the canyon's rim, her worst fears were realized. Rolf was pinned down behind a large boulder, his face pale with terror as crossbow bolts ricocheted off the stone around him. His expedition had not uncovered a natural wonder. He had stumbled into a nest of Erasure agents, survivors of the Stronghold's collapse, who had repurposed the canyon's strange acoustics. They were using the whispering walls as a vast listening dish, intercepting and decoding the faint magical pulses the guild used for long-distance communication. Rolf's impulsive quest had led him directly to a threat that could expose their entire network. There was no more time for observation. Elara moved with a grim efficiency born of survival. She did not attack the agents directly. Instead, she used the canyon itself as her weapon, a carefully aimed spell, a sharp kinetic push against a precariously balanced rock spire high on the canyon wall, started a controlled avalanche. The cascade of stone and dust created a deafening roar that shattered the delicate acoustic spy setup and gave Rolf the cover he needed to scramble to safety. Together, they subdued the disoriented agents, a frantic, desperate struggle in the choking dust. Back in the library, the silence felt heavier than ever. Rolf stood before her, his youthful arrogance utterly shattered, replaced by a raw and humbled understanding. He had not proven his courage. He had nearly gotten them both killed, and had almost delivered the guild's secrets to its enemies on a silver platter. The Whispering Canyon did not hold echoes of the future. It had shown him the terrifyingly immediate consequences of his own actions. He had learned the cost of a map, not from a story, but from the sharp whistle of a crossbow bolt passing inches from his head. The Whispering Canyon offered more than just echoes of a near disaster. In the days that followed, Elara and Rolf conducted a careful survey of the fissure. Their initial fear, giving way to a dawning realization. They discovered the canyon was a natural amplifier for not just sound, but for the unique magical signatures left by the Eraser's reality, altering spells. By attuning simple scrying crystals to the canyon's resonant frequency, they could detect the faint, sickly green ripple of an eraser working miles away, a ghostly tremor in the magical firmament. The very trap that had almost ensnared them was in fact an unparalleled strategic tool. They immediately established a hidden outpost, carving a small, camouflaged shelter into the canyon wall. This new post became the guild's eyes and ears, a vital early warning system that could pinpoint Eraser incursions across the vast expanse of Hammerfell. But this advantage came with a steep price. The outpost required constant monitoring, a steady supply of enchanted components, and a permanent, vigilant presence. For Elara, this meant long, wearying journeys away from the mountain library, her focus fractured between guarding the ultimate truth and watching for those who sought to destroy it. The weight of the true Atlas felt heavier during her absences, a constant, nagging worry in the back of her mind. Seeing Rolf's transformed demeanor, his impulsive energy now channeled into a meticulous, sober dedication, she made a decision. She promoted him to the rank of Warden, granting him sole command of the canyon outpost. It was an act of profound trust and a chance for redemption, placing the guild's most valuable new asset directly into the hands of the apprentice whose mistake had revealed it. The canyon's existence was now their most closely guarded secret, a weapon that would become the Eraser's primary target if ever discovered. With the new outpost secured and a capable warden in place, Elara finally returned to the deep silence of the mountain library. The familiar chill of the stone corridors was a welcome relief, but her mind was no longer at rest. She stood before the sealed vault, her hand resting on its cold surface, and for the first time, her thoughts stretched beyond the next threat, the next hidden map. She began to contemplate the legacy of their struggle and how to ensure the guild would endure long after she was gone. The air within the pocket realm tasted of ozone and old paper, a space woven from magic between the ticks of a clock. Here, in a grand hall with shifting murals for walls, Elara convened the first council of cartographers. For the first time in recorded history, a Slode from the coral towers of Thraz sat across from a Maormer serpent priest from Pyandonia, their very presence a testament to the gravity of the occasion. The Slode's voice was a wet, bubbling murmur as it described coastlines not as fixed lines, but as temporary agreements between the land and the sea, while the Maormer spoke of navigating by the songs of leviathans that remembered drowned continents. These were not just different maps, they were different ways of seeing the world itself, but this unprecedented gathering almost shattered before it truly began. An old, bitter argument erupted between a Redguard scholar and an Altmer emissary over the ancient borders of the Deathlands, a region both claimed as a foundational part of their cultural heritage. The debate grew heated, accusations of historical theft and geographical heresy flying across the circular table. The fragile alliance was tearing at the seams, threatened by the very histories they were all trying to preserve. Elara stepped into the fray, not with a decree, but with a question that cut through the noise. She asked them not whose claim was more valid, but what would be left to claim if the Erasers, or a force like them, succeeded in unmaking the entire region from reality. The question brought a chilling silence. She reframed their purpose, steering them away from competing truths and toward a collaborative defense of truth itself. She proposed they pool their knowledge not to create one master map that erased their differences, but to build a living network, a magically linked library where each culture's perspective could be seen layered together. The goal was not uniformity, but a richer, more complete understanding. The council, humbled and refocused, agreed to the monumental undertaking. They would forge a network of scrying crystals and enchanted vellums, a system where a geographical change detected by a Maormer tide watcher would ripple instantly to a Dwemer archaeologist in Morrowind. It was a dream of unity Tamriel scholars had never dared to imagine. As the council concluded and the delegates began their departures, a robed figure who had remained silent throughout the proceedings glided toward Elara. His eyes held the weight of countless years. "I am Lore Master Iachesis of the Sigic Order," he said, his voice serene. "Your network is a beautiful, fragile thing. It exists in the present, but its greatest threats may come from the past or future. We offer our aid to weave threads of time magic through its foundation, to help it perceive not only where things are, but where they have been and where they might yet be." The network was a tapestry woven from starlight and shared memory. Under the quiet guidance of the Sigic Lore Master, the Guild and its new allies began the delicate work of connecting their scattered knowledge. Enchanted scrying crystals, carved with runes of unity and perception, were placed in hidden sanctums, from the sweltering Alakar to the moss-draped vales of Valenwood. When the final connection was made, a silent chime resonated through the magical firmament, and the web of light ignited. For a breathtaking moment, every participating keeper saw the world not as a collection of separate maps, but as a single, breathing entity. This initial surge of unified magic, however, had unforeseen consequences. As the network settled, it subtly reinforced the true geographical history now stored within its core. In a few isolated regions, the land itself responded. A muddy trade road in high rock, shifted by a dozen yards, suddenly aligning with the forgotten path of an ancient Breton king's procession. A river fork in Black Marsh altered its flow, reclaiming a channel it had abandoned centuries before. These were minor corrections, but to the local rulers who depended on taxes from those roads and trade along those rivers, it felt like an act of sorcerous rebellion. The first investigative agents arrived at a guild outpost in Cyrodiil within a week, their armor gleaming and their questions sharp with imperial suspicion. They demanded to know who had authorized these changes to the Imperial Survey. Elara faced a new kind of enemy, not fanatics who burned maps, but bureaucrats who worshipped them as unchanging law. She knew that fighting them would only confirm their fears. Instead, she chose a path of radical transparency. She decided to send envoys directly to the courts of the most aggrieved rulers, not to apologize, but to explain. Her carefully chosen diplomats were armed not with weapons, but with compelling evidence. They demonstrated how the network could predict landslides in mountain passes days in advance, safeguarding trade caravans. They showed how understanding ancient riverbeds could prevent towns from being built in flood zones. They argued that preserving the true history of border regions could resolve, rather than inflame, territorial disputes. It was a gamble, presenting their greatest secret as a public utility. The stakes could not be higher. If the envoys succeeded, the network would evolve from a hidden archive into a foundational pillar for all of Tamriel. Its benefits, fostering an unprecedented era of cooperation. If they failed, the guild would be hunted not just by erasers, but by the legitimate armies of every province, forcing them deeper into the shadows than ever before. The first major test came in the court of the High King of Skyrim. The Jarl of Whiterun had been furious about a ghost road that had appeared through his hunting lands, and his ire had reached the king's ear in solitude. The guild's envoy, a young but silver-tongued historian, expected a cold reception. Instead, he found an unexpected ally already standing beside the High King's throne. It was Rolf, no longer an impulsive apprentice, but the confident warden of the Whispering Canyon. He had used the Outpost's unique abilities to uncover a long-lost Nord burial ground, a site of great sacred importance, precisely where the new old road now ran. He presented his findings not as a challenge to the king's authority, but as a restoration of Skyrim's proudest heritage. The king, a traditionalist who valued honor above all, was not annoyed. He was impressed. The court wizard of solitude stepped from the shadows behind the High King's throne, his gray robes a stark contrast to the Nord finery around him. It was Valerius. Rolf felt a jolt of disbelief, but the old mage offered him the faintest of nods before turning his attention to the king. He spoke with a new authority, his voice steady, as he explained how the guild's network did not challenge Skyrim's sovereignty, but strengthened it. He described how ancient, forgotten ley lines could be remapped to bolster the protective enchantments around the city walls, and how the prophetic data could warn of avalanches that threatened the holds. He was no longer a rigid academic, but a pragmatic advisor, and the High King listened. The endorsement was granted. Skyrim would extend its protection to the guild's operations within its borders. This was their first major victory in the open, a validation they had never dreamed possible. Yet, when the raven bearing the news reached Elara in the mountain library, her feeling was not one of pure triumph. She understood the profound shift this represented. An official endorsement came with official oversight. The guild's secretive, fluid nature would now have to accommodate royal decrees and political agendas. A king's protection was a cage as much as a shield. Her decision was a careful calibration of risk and reward. She authorized a formal, if limited, partnership with the Skyrim court. They would share specific, non-sensitive geographical data with the royal scouts, information that could help clear treacherous mountain passes or identify new sources of fresh water. In return, the guild gained a measure of legitimacy and a powerful ally. This single agreement, however, was the crack in the dam. The guild was no longer a myth whispered by fringe scholars. It was becoming a semi-official institution, its influence expanding at the cost of its anonymity. Its members were now visible, their safe houses known to the crown, their movements potentially monitored. They had traded the safety of the shadows for the perilous spotlight of political relevance. Within a month, similar offers of cooperation, each with its own complex web of demands and expectations, arrived from the great houses of Morrowind and the noble courts of High Rock. The Cyphers Guild, born in hidden archives and fought for in bloody secrecy, now faced its most subtle and dangerous challenge, defining its very soul in a world that suddenly wanted to give it a crown. The ink used to draft the guild's charter was mixed with powdered adamant and a drop of blood from every senior member. Elara guided the scribes as they penned the foundational principle, that their role was to serve as neutral arbiters of geographical truth for all nations of Tamriel, swearing allegiance to no single crown. This was not a suggestion, but a magically binding vow. The final document hummed with power, its enchantments specifically designed to prevent the guild's knowledge from ever being weaponized for espionage or conquest. A single attempt to use a map to guide an invading army would cause the ink to vanish from the page, rendering it blank. In a ceremony held in a neutral pocket realm, representatives from every major province, from the stern Nords of Skyrim to the secretive dark elves of Morrowind, added their own sigils to the charter, a constellation of political power acknowledging a higher authority, that of the land itself. This hard-won legitimacy nearly tore the guild apart from within. A faction of purists, led by the ever-disapproving Thuron, saw the charter as a surrender. They argued in frantic, hushed meetings that any interaction with governments was a poison, a slow and inevitable corruption of their mission. By accepting the oversight of kings and councils, they were trading their sacred independence for a gilded cage, becoming just another tool for the powers they had sworn to circumvent. The threat of a schism was real and palpable, a cold crack forming in the foundation they had just built. Elara faced them not with anger, but with a weary resolve forged in mountain passes and Daedric offers. She stood before the divided guild and laid her own history bare. We hid for centuries, and what did it accomplish? She asked, her voice echoing in the silent chamber. We preserved fragments, while the erasers nearly erased continents. Isolation is not purity, it is irrelevance. Our truths must be used, or they become as meaningless as the lies they replace. True power lies not in hiding from the world, but in engaging with it to ensure our maps guide builders, not conquerors, that they foster peace and progress, not war. Her conviction, rooted in tangible loss and hard-won survival, carried the day. The charter was ratified, and the purists, though displeased, remained, their dissent a permanent, low hum in the guild's new reality. The charter solidified the guild's place in the world, transforming them from a myth into an institution. But this new stature came with a terrifying price. They were no longer a hidden enemy to be quietly eliminated. They were now a high-profile, permanent fixture on Tamriel's political landscape. Any faction, any Daedric prince, any power that opposed their vision of a unified, truthful world now knew exactly where to aim. The bull's eye was painted directly on their heart. With the final sigil dried and the magical bonds settled into place, a profound quiet fell over Elara. The political battles were won, for now, but her thoughts turned inward, to the quiet library and the empty chambers of her own life, to the legacy that now felt heavier than any mountain. The final page of the true atlas settled into place with a soft sigh of parchment. In the deep silence of the mountain library, the air hummed with the collected memory of a world, a presence so profound it felt like a second heartbeat in the stone. Elara stood before the completed work, her life's purpose bound in leather and ink, and for a single, fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel not the weight of it, but the peace. Then the mountain screamed. The assault was not a physical breach, but a metaphysical one. The air itself curdled, and the library's protective wards flared into a violent, shimmering crimson. as a coalition of Erasure remnants and rogue mages, their faces masks of fury and greed, tore their way into the sanctum through a ragged hole in reality. They did not come for plunder. They came for the heart of the world's memory, and they would burn the mountain to cinders to claim it. Their leader, a mage whose eyes burned with the cold fire of absolute certainty, raised a blade of solidified shadow. Elara did not reach for a weapon. She placed her palms flat upon the cover of the true atlas and opened it not to a page, but to its soul. She did not fight their assault. She invited it in, channeling the invader's own violent magical energy back through the atlas. She transformed their attack into a conduit. A wave of pure, unfiltered truth erupted from the book, a vision not of force, but of consequence. It flooded the minds of every person in the chamber. The mage saw not a map, but his own ancestral village, a place he had loved as a child, erased from existence because its location contradicted a noble's land claim. An Erasure enforcer felt the phantom pain of a lost limb, not from a battle, but from a forgotten rock slide that could have been predicted had the true geography of a cliffside been known. They saw the crumbling ruins of libraries filled with books of poetry and science, lost when the islands that housed them were scoured from the charts. They witnessed the endless, bloody border wars fought over lines drawn on false maps, and the families torn apart for generations. The vision was not an accusation. It was an experience. It was the shared grief of 1,000 severed connections, the collective sigh of wonders lost to a comfortable lie. The blade of shadow in the leader's hand did not simply drop. It dissolved into motes of harmless dust, his fanatical resolve crumbling under the weight of a sorrow that was now his own. His eyes, once burning with conviction, were now wide with a horrified understanding. He fell to his knees, his gaze fixed on Elara. "We were pruning a tree to save it," he whispered, his voice broken. "But we were cutting away its roots. I came to destroy a weapon. You have shown me it is a seed." With a trembling hand, he tore the gray Erasure insignia from his robe and let it fall to the floor. He swore an oath then and there to spend the rest of his days protecting the very truth he had sought to extinguish. His followers, equally shattered, laid down their arms, their purpose hollowed out and replaced by a solemn, daunting responsibility. The battle was over, won not with a spell, but with a story. The true Atlas had proven its ultimate power. It was not a shield or a sword, but a mirror, and in showing a coalition of destroyers their own reflection in the tapestry of time, it had not defeated them. It had remade them. Seasons turned in the library's silent heart, measured not by the sun, but by the soft rustle of apprentice robes and the gentle hum of the scrying network. Elara, her hair now the color of mountain frost, watched from a simple wooden chair as Rolf, his youthful impatience long tempered into a calm and steady wisdom, guided a new class of keepers. He spoke not of conquest, but of stewardship, his voice a low murmur as he taught them to listen to the land's own quiet voice. The world outside was not a perfect tapestry of peace. Petty squabbles and new secrets still bloomed in shadowed corners, for mortals will always find reasons for conflict. Yet the foundational sickness, the great lie about the very ground beneath their feet, had been cleansed. Borders were now debated with shared historical records, not bloodshed. Trade routes, built on accurate charts, brought prosperity to forgotten valleys. The land itself felt more solid, its memory no longer a wound, but a foundation. In the quiet of the evening, Elara would sometimes trace the lines of a simple merchant's map, one used by a caravan master in Hammerfell, or a sailor exploring the Abessian Sea. She saw no grand monuments to her name, no statues in city squares. Her legacy was there, in the confidence of that sailor's course, in the safety of that merchant's path. She had traded the warmth of a family hearth for the cold stone of the library, the laughter of children for the whispers of parchment. The choice had cost her the simple, ordinary life she might have once desired. Yet as she looked upon a world finally reconciled with its own true shape, a profound peace settled within her. Her sacrifice was woven into the vibrant, living map of Tamriel itself, a story written not in stone, but in the ever-unfolding truth of the land, finally known, finally whole.